Good morning. We are about to resume Bible study in Exodus, and we left off in chapter 12 of Exodus, and we have had the first 11 chapters are about Moses himself and how he is the deliverer. And so we had everything from his birth to how God saved him and so forth, how he lived 40 years in the palace, and then he wound up in exile for 40 years in Midian, and then God called him back. So then we started the 12 plagues. Well, we're in the 12 plagues, 10 plagues. We are now to the 10th plague. We have been talking a whole lot about it, but this isn't. God is birthing a nation, a whole nation, and by the count that we get in Numbers, when they finally take a census, there is a count of 603,550 men. That does not count women and children, and that did not count what they called rabble, the mixed multitude that went with them. So we're talking 2 million people or so that were part of this Exodus, and that starts this new nation. And Moses is their leader, and Aaron is his spokesman, and we have they have a lot to learn. They have a whole lot to learn. So God is giving them ordinances that have to do with celebrating. Okay, I'm saving your firstborn, and they're going to be dedicated to me, and so forth. So it gets very, very complex all of a sudden with what is going on, has been going on behind the scenes while these other plagues are happening. And I often wondered about the logistics of where Moses was versus where Pharaoh was, because he was going back and forth.
Yeah. He had to have been in the same city.
Very close.
Yeah.
And so I'm presuming that this was at the city that the Hebrews built called Ramesses. And it was up near Goshen. It was not in Goshen, but it was up near Goshen. They built 2 cities up there, and that's the one that kind of made the court. And so, you know, it could have been that they were revamping some of the other places, and they had more than one capital in their culture. And through the years, it changed according to who the Pharaoh was. But anyway, so he had to have been close. All right. So just for grins, start off with read verses 29 and 30 for me, please. You'll have to speak loud because you're on the other end of the table.
And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. Verse 30. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead.
That had to have been, chilling. Just imagine, every household had a firstborn. If it wasn't your child, it might have been the father or
The mother.
well, these are firstborn males.
Oh, they didn't take females?
No, just the firstborn males.
But it was man and beast. So we're talking the bull, we're talking the beasts of burden, we're talking
All cattle is what mine said. Or livestock. No, mine says livestock.
so there was obviously a huge uproar from the Egyptians because this happened to the Egyptians, not to the Hebrews. But there was no respecter of privilege. We're talking from the king
Position.
to the whoever was in the dungeon. It didn't matter, if that person in the dungeon was the firstborn, he died. Yeah. So that's kind of where we left off. There was not one household that did not have someone dead. Okay. So I've kind of wondered, we're finally in the proactive part. This happened now, and we're not talking about it's going to happen. This is now happening. And so I kind of wondered, okay, what member of the Trinity was this?
Causing the death?
Was this angel of the Lord that passed up? In other, like in Psalms or whatnot, Wolford and Zuck say the destroyer, who is talked about in Hebrew 11 verse 28. The destroyer killed the firstborn, and that may have been the angel of the Lord. And that we know the angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Christ. It could have been an angel. I mean, it could have been Michael. It could have been.
I had thought of the Holy Spirit also because he's the breath of God.
There's no way for us to truly know, but it says the Lord smote. So we know, I would think that meant it was one of the Trinity, and it was not likely the Father.
Yeah.
And they usually refer to the Lord as
And the angel of the Lord, as you said, the pre-incarnate Christ.
I'm speculating. I totally, freely admit I'm speculating. But I don't think we ever think about those things enough. That we just say, oh, the Lord did, the Lord. Yes, but the Lord is
Which of the three?
which of the three? Because of all the things that we don't do is give the Holy Spirit enough credit. We just kind of, I don't know whether it was my upbringing or what, but we just kind of pass over. And what I have discovered, and this is a discovery process, that all through Genesis and up to now, we have the pre-incarnate Christ operating on earth. From the Garden of Eden. Now, during creation, it was very obviously all three.
Yeah.
But by the time we got to the Garden of Eden, it was pre-incarnate Christ. He was walking on the earth. And I saw him in different places, and it was recognized when he showed up with Abraham. It said it was the angel of the Lord and another angel.
Yeah.
And that's
Not-
before
not
they,
just two angels, but
Yes.
the angel of the Lord and another angel.
and that was before Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Anyway, it's very interesting to me that we have not tried to designate, and at least it wasn't in my upbringing. It was just kind of passed over, and God did it, and God did do it. God
And it
did.
is God. They are all three God.
They are all three. Read verses 31 and 32, please.
And he called for Moses and Aaron by night. Wait a minute. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said." Verse 32. Also take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also.
Okay, now up to this point, he has said, "Oh, well, you can go, but don't take everybody. Oh, well, you can go, but don't take your
the
flocks."
men.
Yes, I mean, he'd always had a caveat, something that was a compromise from what Moses was telling him. And Moses never told him that they were coming back. He just said, "We need to go 3 days into the wilderness." I don't know how far that is from where they are, but 3 days into the wilderness to make the sacrifices and make this is what God has told us to do, and we must all do it, and we must do it together, and it requires sacrifice. So we have to take our cattle and our sheep and our goats, because that's
The
what
sacrifice.
that is the sacrifice. So finally, Pharaoh is said, "Okay, go,
Take it all.
take it on, get out,
And his grief, please go.
please go."
But bless me before you go.
Yes, now there's several things here. Pharaoh is finally totally humbled and tells Moses and Aaron, "There's no compromise. I order you to go. Take everything. Oh, and please bless me." Pharaoh wanted to be under Yahweh's blessing, not the curse of the plagues. And Matthew Henry says, "That bless me also, that I may not be plagued for what is past when you are gone." Now you have to remember, Matthew Henry wrote this, I think 300 years ago, a long, long time ago. So his English is very formalized. Would you read the footnote on 31 and 32, please?
It's on that, 31 and 32. Pharaoh had one last encounter with Moses and Aaron, and had declared that Moses could die if they met again, but he could not keep that resolve. Instead, he captured and gave unconditional release of all the Israelites to go and worship. But he himself made no mention of worshiping the Lord. Pharaoh's desire for blessings recalls earlier dealings of Egyptians that others than God's people that show things could have been far different for him.
Okay, I'm not sure I was keeping up with that, but McDonald had a different spin on all of this. Do you remember back in chapter 10, and it's verse 28. Pharaoh said unto Moses, remember they had this little altercation, and they said, get away from me, take heed to thyself, see thy face, my face, no more, for in that day you shall surely die. And Moses says, oh, you've spoken well. If I see that, I will see thy face again no more. And then it says right here that he called for Moses and Aaron, like he had on all the others, and they're supposed to come see him. Well, MacDonald says, don't forget that it didn't necessarily mean that they met face to face. Because if he sent servants after them, that was the same thing as saying, okay, Pharaoh says. And that would be a substitute. Okay, but there's also in chapter 11, let me see if I can find that, in verse 8.
I found it.
Okay, read.
And all these thy servants shall come down unto me, and bow down themselves unto me, saying, get thee out, and all the people that follow thee, and after that I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in a great anger.
Okay, so here's the deal. If Pharaoh sends his servants out, that fulfills both of those verses correctly. That he sent his servants out, and then it predicted that, okay, your servants are going to come and tell me to leave. And this makes Moses' statement in both 10:29 true, as well as his prediction in 11 verse 8. So we don't have a face-to-face with Moses and Pharaoh. Okay? 3 verses, 33, 34, 35, 36, 4 verses.
And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, and that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we be all dead men. Verse 34. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs, being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. Verse 35. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. 36 as well?
Yes.
Verse 36. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians.
Okay. Do you recognize that word spoiled? The spoils of war.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a victory here, and now we're taking the spoils. Well, they were told to ask
for the silver and gold and clothing and food.
the things that they would need. And now it appears that not only they didn't have to knock on doors.
They brought it
They
to
were
them.
coming out of their houses and saying,
Please take it.
please take this. We need you gone. Now, why do you think they needed them gone?
So they could get out from under the plagues they lived with.
Well, thinking there could be more, but they don't know that it's just the first one that's died. They think it could be all of them.
Yeah.
And there's, if you'll just leave, maybe some of us will get to survive.
We'll survive, yeah.
So it was a very emotional time in the middle of the night. It's the middle of the night because this lamb comes over. The Passover happens at midnight?
At midnight?
Yeah, at midnight. So it is a very, very, very critical time. In the middle of the night, they are packing up. They were supposed to eat that Passover dinner with their loins girded. Yes, loins
Ready
girded.
to go.
Ready to walk out with their possessions. Ready to walk out. So, the footnote for number 33. Yeah.
We be all dead men is the last recorded statements to Moses by ordinary Egyptians. It uses just 2 words in Hebrew and assesses the situation without any pretense. The expectation being that all the Egyptians were about to die if the Israelites stayed any longer in Egypt.
Yeah. It's like, if you're staying, we're probably all dying. We have seen all of these death and destruction, and the crops have failed. Everything has gone wrong. So it appears that no Israelite had to go knock. Maybe they did prior to these last plagues or something, but it looks like all they had to do was walk out, and these people said, "Oh, and take this. You might need that. Oh, here."
Yeah.
And it was mutual by divine decree, and we have the spoils of war walking out. No more death had to be had. God was doing all of this. Okay, so Egypt was thoroughly pillaged and plundered by God himself. The Egyptians did not know the killing was over. With the firstborn, they feared total annihilation of their population, and they wanted these people gone at any price. They had priorities. They'd rather live than have stuff. Okay, so now we actually come to the end of plague number 10. Okay, we've got the 10 plagues, and we have finished the 10 plagues. Finally, it has come to pass in a past tense. Okay, read verse 37, please.
And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men, beside children.
Okay, now we start the Exodus. That's what we have named the chapter is named. We have now here into chapter 12 and verse 37 out of 51 before we finally are leaving Egypt. Now, folks, nobody knows where they went. People know where they did not go because God tells us where they did not go. But it is very, very confusing. Many of those places we know where Ramses was, okay? And Succoth is not that far. But there are other towns named Succoth. And then it says, and they go to the next one, there's more towns named that. So we don't really know where these are. I'll give you some maps and whatnot, but it says at this point they're talking about 600,000 men. That's a conservative estimate. Moses is making the the estimate, and I'm sure it's with God's help, but nonetheless, he's writing this, and he doesn't know how many people. And it did not include the women and children, and so the very conservative estimate was there were over 1 million people, and perhaps more realistic estimates are that it was plus or minus 2 million people that left, because we come across in Numbers chapter 1 verse 46, we come up with the exact figure 603,550 men. Yeah. Now, but how long it was between here and Numbers is, I haven't gone that far ahead. You know, I'm not trying to get that far ahead of you. So, did y'all get maps last week? Or last time? Yes, I gave you maps. So pull those out, and it's of the Sinai Peninsula, and this is the one that is in the Holman Bible itself, and it shows up here where Ramesses is, and then over to Succoth, and then over to the next place. Okay. We don't know all of these names. We know that this Succoth is not the same one that's in Genesis, because that's already in Canaan. So we know they didn't get that far. And this is probably a Hebrew name for the Egyptian city Thuku, which is the chief city in this district. Well, they've taken that and gone ahead and called it Succoth. Because it wasn't called. And anyway, this one down here is called Succoth. Yeah, it does get confusing. So notice on the map, this is maybe the only part of Exodus that is truly known. Everything is possible alternative route. So when you look at that, and you look at those routes, you can see how varied there are. I mean, some of them have them going down here in Midian, and it has an icon here, the little bitty arrow that speaks of mountains. They have 5 of them on there marked as Mount Sinai, because they don't know where Mount Sinai is. But they do know that's where they were going. So it's a very, to us, a very uncertain place. All right. But you know what? They had God lead them.
They get where they're going.
And do you remember how that happened?
Cloud, fire by night and cloud by day.
Yes. And it's not 2, it's 1. And guess what that is? That is Jesus pre-incarnate.
Oh.
That is, you remember, he spoke from the cloud.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is Jesus pre-incarnate. Okay. Verse 38, please.
And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very, very much cattle.
Okay. Read the Holman's footnote on verse 38 about the mixed multitude.
Mixed multitude may have included laborers or other ethnicities who saw an opportunity to escape from Egypt's servitude, but who had not necessarily come to faith in God.
Okay. McGee says, now we learn more about this in the book of Numbers, okay, that this mixed multitude, but they're troublemakers. Finally, factually, we can say they're half-breeds. So a lot of them were the result of a Hebrew man marrying an Egyptian woman, or an Egyptian man marrying a Hebrew woman, and they've got divided loyalties about whether to go or whether to stay. And you can see how mamas want their children to go, and so they're pulled along. But then you've also got this country has been laid to waste. You know, by the time the locusts came in, there's not a leaf. There's maybe some bark on a tree. This country is wasted. So if they had anything to do with agriculture, what are they going to do for a living? You know, how are they going to survive? They don't have Moses has put up food for them. They are in, why not leave? Why not leave? But they're not of the faith. And because they're not of the faith, they're going to be the first ones to murmur and have a problem when things are not just perfect. Okay, Wolford and Zuck says, apparently this undesignated number, we don't know how many, of a variegated group of rabble caused the Israelites to complain against Moses in the wilderness. Now that's just facts, folks. It wasn't just the Israelites. I'm not going to say the Israelites weren't going to murmur, but I can tell you they were totally egged on. And we all know. I mean, we can see it in our streets today, where there's a group of rebel rousers, and the dissension that they can cause. Matthew Henry says about this mixed multitude, a hanger-on to that great family. We're just going to hang on to them. Okay. Some perhaps willing to leave their country because it was laid to waste by the plagues. Others went out of curiosity to see the rites that they were going to do and sacrifice to their God, and which had been so much talked about, and they expected to see some glorious appearances of God and that sort of stuff. So they came out for the show. And probably the greatest part of this mixed multitude were but a rude, unthinking mob that followed the crowd they knew not why. We afterwards find that they proved a snare to them. And we find that out in like I said, he uses very, very formalized English, so it's like. And MacDonald has had these nice, succinct little conclusions. Mixed multitude, it equals foreigners, the tag-alongs. Now, if you'll remember, Worsby says this was like an army in divisions. Okay, we've already talked that they, when they left as an army. They were 5 abreast. This didn't happen overnight. They had to be taught how to march this way, because who goes first? Which tribe goes first? Well, who's the head of the tribe? That sort of stuff. This has been talked about here in chapter 12 and verse 17, and again at the end of the chapter. And they marched quickly and in an orderly fashion, and with their flocks and their herds. Now, if you've seen an army march, you know there's always the baggage stuff. You've got your food supply. Well, that's where the flocks and herds were. You don't want to follow in the dust of a bunch of herds. Yeah, it's going to be bad enough marching in the dust of the people in front of you, much less in the herds and whatnot. So, let's see, they marched quickly in orderly fashion with their flocks and their herds. Not one Jew, not one, well, Worsby's the one that uses Jew inappropriately here, or Israelite, was too feeble to march. Not one of them. Nobody had to be carried. And the Egyptians were glad to see these Israelites get out of their land. And when we see, going to Psalms 105, 38 verses 37 and 38 talk about this, how they were all glad to see them go. Who? This is the nation. A nation walking out. Okay. 39 through 42, please.
And they baked unleavened cakes of thy dough which they brought out of Egypt. For it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual. Verse 40.
Now we say that victuals.
Okay. Verse 40. Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. Verse 41. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. Verse 42. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations.
Okay, so they're finally leaving. They're leaving in the middle of the night, and this is to be observed. And I came across this phrase, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land. And I never found anybody that addressed that. I'll give you some of the explanations of it, but let me do this one first. Wolford and Zucks. Moses concluded this section about the beginning of the Exodus with a historical notation, a reminder of God's faithfulness, and a call to remembrance. The length of Israel's time in Egypt here is said 430 years, which is repeated in Galatians 3:17, while other passages state that it was 400 years. Like in Genesis, when God told Abraham, he said it would be 400 years. And that's repeated in Acts chapter 7, verse 6. And about 450 years in Acts, chapter 13, verse 20. Apparently, the total time in Egypt was, and this is from the scholars, 430 years, from 1876 BC to 1446 BC. The fact of God's care over his people on the night of the Exodus should be remembered. Since he kept a vigil over them, they should honor him. They were told to be careful and vigilant because God is careful and vigilant. They were to remember that. Okay. This verse 41 is all the hosts of the Lord. Most of the time it is called the Lord of hosts. And perhaps here is most of his chosen people. And perhaps the angelic hosts are leaving also. I mean, I truly have not gotten around this. That the host of angels is going along with them, is leaving Egypt also, is taking care of them. I don't know. But Wikipedia says the Bible typically, now Wikipedia, I'm telling you, describes the heavenly host as being made up of angels and gives several descriptions of the angels in military terms, such as their encampment, such as their command structure and participation in combat. And a host is part of a military term, okay? The host in an Oxford dictionary, the term host involved, designated originally an armed expedition against an enemy, and then the army itself, and finally, by extension, the obligation to serve in arms. So I never got a true definition of what this is. Like I say, absolutely, out of 7 commentators, including the Holman here, no one addressed that term. Because that's the only time I've seen it like that.
It seems to me it would be referring more to the military term, because they were going out abreast as the military does. They were marching as the military does.
And he
And
considered
the
them
host
there.
is a military term as
Yeah.
well.
So all the host of the Lord went out from the land. So that is,
It's his army.
it's God's army on earth.
Yeah.
That makes as much sense as anything.
I
Okay.
just wanted to inject there in that spot too. Is this not the first day of the Jewish calendar now?
Yes.
That's what I thought we had
Yeah.
covered last week, something about that when they exited, that midnight was the first day, I think.
Yeah.
Or it may have been at sundown.
They start a nation, and they started with a new calendar, and I looked that up because he gave Nisan and Abib as the name of this month, this new month, and both of those are from other cultures. One of them's Babylonian, and I can't even remember the other one. I've got it written down here, and it's like, well, why don't they give it
A Jewish
a Hebrew name? And so I looked up the Hebrew name, and it came up with Nisan. So it's like, okay. And if I'm not mistaken, that was from their Babylonian exile. That name came up. Anyway,
Well, they might not have named their calendar or the first month of their calendar at that point.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Okay. And then I say, and don't lose sight of the point that Moses is making and the emphasis that he makes in verse 42. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord. Okay? Unto the Lord. For bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is the night of the Lord to be observed of all children of Israel in their generation. 4 generations. Even today. For even today. Okay. This next section goes from verse 43 to the end of the chapter. I'll try not to interrupt you.
And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. Verse 44. But every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. Verse 45. A foreigner and an hired servant shall not eat thereof. Verse 46. In one house shall it be eaten, thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall ye break a bone thereof. Verse 47. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. Verse 48. And then a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord. Let all his mates be circumcised.
His males.
Males, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. He shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. Verse 49. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that is sojourn among you. Verse 50. Thus did all the children of Israel, as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. Verse 51. And it came to pass that the selfsame day that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies.
By their armies. Okay. Let me go back over this as much as I can, because this is the end of the chapter, and that all read as one phrase, because it's talking about, all right, you're going to celebrate the Passover, but what was the crux of it?
You had to be circumcised.
You had to be an Israelite. You either identified with being an Israelite. If you were owned, you were Israelite. But if you just worked for someone,
Hard labor, no.
no. Unless you identified with circumcision. And so, now, well, what about the women? Okay, alright. Wolford and Zuck. At Succoth, that's where we think we are, Moses and Aaron were given regulations about celebrating the Passover and the instructions for the dedication of the firstborn. Okay, now this goes all the way into the next chapter. All right. There were several regulations for the Passover were apparently necessitated by the non-Israelites who joined their exodus. Okay, we know, we've already talked about this, mixed multitude, and they may or may not be able to be identified and take part in this religious ceremony that is thanking God. If a man did not identify with the covenant promises by the rite of circumcision, he could not celebrate. And this feast was to be centered in the home and observed by an entire family, which made community. Okay? Which is now a nation. Alright. But the women, they could be identified. Oh, well, let me see what I said. Their Holman footnote says, a woman's participation would normally depend on her family connections. Okay. Whatever that means.
If my father was a Jew and participated, then I can too. If my husband was a Jew and he participated, then I could too.
But she didn't have to, and she had to identify with it, and if her husband didn't and her father did, she may have to leave her home in order to participate.
Right.
So this was very formalized. It was very clear. And McDonald says, no foreigner, no hired servant, no sojourner, somebody who's just traveling with them, no alien, no neighbor. It was very, very clear.
But those that lived among them and were circumcised could then participate.
My conclusion was, one can see why circumcision was such a big deal, and why in the New Testament, when the Christians were making non-Gentiles and they were converting them
And demanding that they
and
be circumcised.
demanding that they be circumcised before, because that was totally ingrained from from the minute they became a nation.
Yeah.
They were told, it is circumcision. This is what sets you apart. So, verse 51, and it says, and it came to pass, that self-same day, that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land by their armies. Okay, so Matthew Henry says, this chapter concludes with a repetition of the whole matter, that the children of Israel did as they were bidden, and God did it for them as he promised. Okay, we started the whole chapter with, we're going to celebrate, we're going to thank God, and we're going to have this. There's 3 celebrations all at the same time. The Passover to God himself, the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, which lasts for a week, talking about the journey, and that is your celebration. You're thanking God on the first one. That's a solemn rite. And then you're celebrating. And then during that, the day after
The weekend.
the week, very confusing to me. But anyway, then it was the dedication of the firstborn, which doesn't take place for a while. Okay. By their armies. There's no accident that there's military order. And of course, this can't be achieved without some forethought, some knowledge, which means Moses had to be giving them instructions prior to the 10th plague. Because those last ones happened, 3 of them happened in January to mid-April. And so there had to be a whole lot of training going on. Well, that ends chapter 12. Thank you very much for reading for me, Angie and Stephanie. I appreciate your reading for me. And we start another whole chapter, and it's just finally at a dividing place that is by chapter, and we may be able to keep on chapters here for quite a while. So I'm going to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.